Right. I'd say we could probably get started.
Okay. We're good, Eileen?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Okay. So, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's session on this timely yet stuck in the mud issue of immigration reform, or lack thereof. My name is Harry Nam. I am a member of Reform Elections Now, or REN as we call it, and I have the privilege of introducing today's speaker. But before I do that, I have a personal and current anecdote that I want to share with you all to give you an idea of how little we've moved on the issue of immigration. Like I was home one night, a couple nights ago, and I was channel surfing, and I came across an issue of The West Wing. So I'm sure most of you remember this. It was a pretty amazing show, Emmy Award winning. And it seemed like every episode really caught the gist of whatever issues that they were locked in on. And as they did on those other issues, they did so with immigration. So they talked about border security, DACA, asylum admissions, work visa programs. It was uncanny how spot on the issues that they were discussing, all the characters were wrapped around, and how spot on they were with the issues we're facing today. So I was amazed by the accuracy of the writers to catch with such accuracy the current challenges of immigration that we talk about in today's environment. So I was just curious. I thought maybe this was a rerun or remake of an issue that they did in the past, because as you know, this was a show that was on in the late 1990s. And so I Googled the episode, and it turns out the episode was from October of 2004, 20 years ago. So it gives you, really a feel for how little we have moved on this issue of immigration. So fortunately today, we have our Director of Research, Peter Siris. And I don't say this lightly. He's someone who deserves, doesn't need an introduction, but he's here to unpack and address sort of what's holding us back on the issue of immigration and the way forward to real and meaningful change. So, Peter, take it away. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Harry. Appreciate it. So today we're going to talk about the fact that the failure of immigration legislation is a symptom of our broken government. Now, immigration problems have always existed. Hold on one second. I got this my trying to get rid of the name so I can read my document. But if you look, the Benjamin Franklin said, Benjamin Franklin said, those who come hither are the most ignorant sorts of in their own nation, and we gotta control them. John Adams said, why should we take bread out of the mouths of our own children and give them to strangers? John Jay said, we should build a wall around the country, obviously learning that from Donald Trump. Henry Cabot Lodge in 1896, talked about the possibility of a great and perilous change in the very fabric of our race. But to me, Jay Leno really summed it up when he said, Indians had a special name for illegal immigration. They called it white people. Yet while many have objected to immigration, we have never really had a time in our history like this where our government was unwilling or unable to face the problem. In February, Congress failed to pass legislation on immigration. Democrats blame Donald Trump and Mike Johnson. Republicans blame Joe Biden. Both sides immediately started using the failure as fodder for the next election. But the failure was not caused by Trump, Johnson, or Biden. It was caused by a government that has stopped working. Congress has been unable to pass immigration legislation for the past 34 years. Now, 34 years ago, Joe Biden was a senator from a small state. Trump was married to Ivana and in the casino business, and Mike Johnson was too young to drive. So the failure to pass an immigration law is a symptom of how dysfunctional our government has become. Okay, so immigration, look, is a huge problem. The following chart shows Southwest border apprehensions by month. And if you look, you see the number just going up and up from a low in January 2020 to, highs almost every month. Now, it's even worse because during the pandemic, we used Title 42 to expel many of the migrants. Once the pandemic came under control, we ended Title 42. So what that means is more immigrants were coming and more of them stayed. And that's when problems intensified. So as a result, we now have the largest percentage of immigrants in the history of our country as a percentage. And obviously, in terms of number, 15.1%, more than 49 million immigrants in the country. And also, the immigrants have a different impact on different states. If you look at these costs, you'll see, California, it's 23 billion. Texas, it's 11 billion. New York, it's 7.5 billion. Florida, 6 billion. And then you got a lot of those states in the middle where it's 36 million. Even for Mary Jane, it's only in Iowa, it's only 270 million. Now, and as a result of the increased number of immigrants and the elimination of expulsions, many cities are being overrun by immigrants. Mayor Eric Adams stated that the huge influx of immigrants will destroy New York. And the city expects to spend $12 billion in the next 3 years. And to come up with the money, it's going to cut its police, sanitation, and public education. In Chicago, they spent $361 million last year, and just a few weeks ago, evicted 2,000 migrants from their shelter. And in Denver, Mayor Mike Johnson told city council members that they were going to spend $180 million, more than three times what it spends on the homeless. Now, according to a recent Times Siena poll, 74% think illegal immigration is a serious problem. Immigration now tops the economy as the #1 issue for voters. This is the first time that I can find anything topping the economy. As Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. Well, no, it's immigration, stupid. And only 23% say the U.S. government is doing a good job at the border, and most Americans want fewer immigrants admitted. Except we don't want more immigrants unless they can dunk. Now, this is very important because immigrants who can dunk a basketball are gladly welcomed by even the most anti-immigrant politicians. When was the last time you heard Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, who complains about immigrants all day long, complaining about an immigrant from Slovenia named Luka Doncic, who plays for the Mavericks, or one from France named Victor Wembanyama, who plays for San Antonio? When was the last time you heard Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson complaining about an immigrant from Greece named Giannis Antetokounmpo, or Congressman Lauren Boebert from Colorado complaining about a Serbian immigrant named Nikola Jokic, or Mehmet Oz complaining about a Cameroonian named Joel Embiid? And when was the last time you heard any politician, Republican or Democrat, complaining about the 187 immigrants from Cuba, Venezuela, and the Dominican Republic who play in Major League Baseball? Now, these athletes are taking jobs from real Americans, but no one complains about them. We gladly invite people who can dunk a basketball into our country, while our politicians complain about immigrants in other fields where we need talented people. Now, not all immigrants are a drag on economy. Look at many business leaders. Of the Magnificent Seven, 4 are run by immigrants and 2 are run by children of immigrants. We won't mention gays. And 57% of the 35 largest companies in the US were founded by the immigrants or their families. 102 companies in the Fortune 500 were founded by immigrants, and 117 were founded by children of immigrants. Those are pretty impressive numbers. And there are 92 immigrants on the Forbes billionaires list. These people are not hurting our country. And many of the immigrants are Nobel Prize winners. Immigrants have won Nobel Prizes at 3 times their share of the population. From 1901, immigrants have won 36% of the American of the Nobel Prizes won by Americans in chemistry, medicine, and physics. Now the number is up to 40%. And now I'm excluding, there was an American whose father was from Kenya, who I think was born in Kenya. He won a Nobel Peace Prize, Barack something or other, but I'm excluding him and just focusing on physics, chemistry, and medicine. Now, medicine is another thing. 29.1% of all physicians in the US are immigrants, twice their total of the population as a whole. Interesting, 6.9% of these doctors are not citizens, meaning they could be sent back to their home country. And according to the AAMC, the US will have a projected shortage of 121,900 physicians and 195,400 nurses by 2032. Now, we could open more schools and educate people, but right now, one way of filling this void is to allow the immigration of doctors and nurses. The problem is the laws that granted skilled exemptions to skilled personnel have been suspended. The CEO of an elder care company told me, he said, 20 years ago, we were able to fill our vacancies with nurses from the Philippines. Now that route is blocked. We have to turn away patients because we can't find nurses. If the US has a shortage of healthcare personnel and we are not training enough of our own, why can't Congress make special exemptions for doctors and nurses? Sorry. And one more thing, the US also needs more people. If you look at the birth rate from 1950 to the present has fallen by more than 50%. It's now below replacement level. And as the population ages, one way or another, we're going to need more people. If Americans aren't birthing enough children, who is going to staff the nursing homes for Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, and most of the rest of us? Immigrants are an easy alternative. Now, there are a number of points on which all Americans should agree. Immigration is a major problem. The United States can't handle an unlimited number of immigrants. Limits do need to be set, but some immigrants are desirable or essential. We should create rules that admit people who can contribute to our country. Now, instead of trying to solve every immigration problem at once, or worse, trying to solve immigration along with Ukraine, Middle East, Taiwan, and everything else. Let's first look at 3 simple solutions to issues related to immigration: asylum, money, and admitting immigrants we need and want. Gotta figure it out. Now, before we were asked about the bill that the omnibus bill, and before I get to what are the strengths and weaknesses of that bill that was introduced this year by a Republican senator from Oklahoma, a Democratic senator from Connecticut, and a Democratic / now independent senator from Arizona, I'd like to talk about the omnibus nature of these bills itself. Because what happens is Congress creates these omnibus bills that few read or understand. The H.R. 1 Voting Act bill and Build Back Better with the infrastructure bill both averaged 1,000 pages, excuse me. This year's immigration bill included funding for Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, international refugees, Taiwan, and other issues. And what happens is that leaders put all sorts of junk in these bills. They hide partisan legislation and then try to pass these omnibus bills. And the question is, instead of huge bills covering every subject, why can't Congress focus on nonpartisan solutions to specific problems? Now, we're going to consider 3 simple examples and then come back to Congress. First, the immigration backlog. There are more than 8 million immigrants living inside the United States in legal limbo. These are people who've been ordered to be deported, who don't have final decisions from the U.S. on their asylum or on other immigration cases. There are 8 million of these people from 3 million in 2020. Now, why? It's real simple. And this chart was from today's Wall Street Journal. The current backlog for an asylum hearing is 10 years. 10 years. That means for 10 years, all these immigrants are wandering around the streets in legal limbo. For 10 years, it means governments have to deal with all these people who have no legal status. How is it possible that these immigrants can spend 10 years waiting in the United States for a court date? These are not people waiting in Mexico. These are people you see on the streets outside your homes, waiting 10 years. Now, there is a pretty easy solution for the asylum crisis. Congress should provide funding for an expansion of asylum courts. If you had an asylum court at every entrance to the United States, and when an immigrant gets to the border, they should be granted a court date within 30 days. If they're approved, they can stay. If not, they have to leave. Now, what would this do? First, it would end the limbo of 8 million immigrants. It would save the economy tens of billions of dollars. It would deter potential immigrants, because if immigrants saw that everybody from, say, Nicaragua was being sent back, they wouldn't try to come. They'd say, hey, we know Nicaraguans, I'm using that as an example, aren't being, admitted. And it would benefit states and cities, because every immigrant who got into the country would be documented, have a legal job, and pay taxes. Expanding the asylum courts will bring order to a chaotic system. Why shouldn't members of both parties vote for it? Okay, let's look at issue number 2, money. While immigrants contribute to the economy, most of the burden falls on specific states and cities. If you look at this chart, federal expenditures are $66 billion, state and local $115 billion. They both, minimal tax contribution comes in. So the states and the cities spend almost twice as much as the federal government. Now, the solution should be easy. The federal government sets the immigration rules, but states pay. Localities have more immigrants than they can handle. States and cities which have no say in the arrival of immigrants are struggling to provide housing, food, education, and healthcare. So simple. If the federal government decides who can be admitted, shouldn't it also pay the cost? If the federal government allocated sufficient money for states and cities to cover the cost of immigrations, some issues would be ameliorated. Now, I'm not saying it's going to change people's positions, but wouldn't Republican senators from Texas and Florida and Democratic senators from New York and California work together on legislation that had the federal government funding the costs of the states? I think so. Now, number three, the U.S. wants the best and the brightest. The U.S. reaches out to the world's best basketball players to have them immigrate. We're proud of Joel Embiid, the Greek Freak, Nikola Jokic, and other NBA stars. The U.S. wants the best business people in the world. Where would AI in this country be without NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, Microsoft Satya Nadella, and Google's Sundar Pichai? The U.S. wants Nobel Prize winners like Katalin Karikó from Hungary, who developed the COVID vaccine. We need more doctors. Yet, when has Congress passed a law or even considered standards to attract the best and the brightest? This chart on the right really gets to me when I look at it. This is full-time graduate students by field. Look at some of these things. Petroleum engineering, international students, 82%. Electrical engineering, 74%. Computer information sciences, 72%. Industrial manufacturing and engineering, 71%. I mean, there are 1 million foreigners at U.S. colleges and universities. 55% major in STEM. 23% in math and computer science and in engineering. 467,000 are studying for master's degrees and doctorates. Yet, when these people graduate, some of them can't stay in the United States. Shouldn't we want to keep people who are getting doctorates in STEM subjects in the United States? So instead of focusing on all immigrants as a group, why can't Congress focus on the people the country wants and needs? We seem to have no problem granting immigration status to an NBA player or a Major League Baseball player. Why shouldn't Congress pass a law making it easier for doctors and nurses to become U.S. citizens? Why shouldn't Congress pass a law giving a green card to anyone who receives a doctorate in a STEM subject from an American university? Why shouldn't Congress pass legislation to offer citizenship to people with specific skills? Wouldn't we rather have that cybersecurity expert who just graduated from Harvard living in the U.S. rather than returning to China? These seem like simple ideas. We need doctors and nurses, people with doctorates in STEM and experts in cybersecurity, just as much as we need basketball players. Why can't Congress pass laws enabling the best and the brightest to become citizens? Okay, these are three simple immigration issues that can be debated and I believe would receive bipartisan. There are many immigration issues that can be debated and would likely receive bipartisan support. We've suggested three that we believe both parties can and should support. Processing asylum applications within 30 days to end a 10-year backlog, keep immigrants out of limbo, reduce the number of people coming to our country, and provide government with both documentation and taxes. Having the federal government bear the cost of immigration to limit the rivalry between states and establishing a system to keep the best and the brightest, to fill critical employment needs, increase our tax base, and improve our competitive advantage. These seem like simple ideas. How could Congress not pass these kind of laws? Yet for 34 years, Congress has failed to pass even one law on immigration. Now let's just look at what happened in 34 years. From 1940 to 1980, Congress passed 10 major pieces of immigration legislation. Since 1990, none. Since 2005, it has failed on 5 separate occasions to pass legislation. Most of these bills were bipartisan, calling for border fencing, a sharp increase in the number of border agents, and other controls that would have enabled the United States to limit the current crisis. While Congress has dithered, the number of immigrants has jumped from 19.8 to 49.5. Yet Congress, as things get worse, plays politics with immigration. Let's just look at recent. John McCain and Teddy Kennedy drafted Secure America and Orderly Immigration Act. It never got a vote. The House and the Senate in 2005-06 each passed bills. They never got reconciled. In 2007, Majority Leader Harry Reid pushed a compromise bill that had bipartisan support and solid backing from Bush. It failed to get a vote in the Senate, where Reid, who was backing it, was the majority leader. In 2013, a bipartisan group of senators named the Gang of Eight negotiated an immigration reform bill, including a path to citizenship, 700 miles of border fencing, and 440,000 border patrol agents. It passed the Senate and not the House. If we had had these bills, we wouldn't have the problem we have today. And in 2024, a bipartisan group of senators created legislation to solve the problems at the southern border, as well as Ukraine and the Middle East. And as soon as the bill was introduced, Trump immediately attacked it, saying, a border bill now would be another gift to the radical left Democrats. They need it politically. As the leader of our party, there's zero chance I will support this horrible open borders betrayal of America. I'll fight it all away. A lot of the senators are trying to say respectfully, they're blaming it on me. I say, oh, that's okay. Please blame it on me, please. And rather than looking at the benefits of the bill, the Speaker of the House said it was DOA, and many Republican senators suddenly got cold feet and turned against it. Now, why can't Congress pass immigration legislation? The answer is simple. Congress is just too polarized. Moderates have disappeared. Legislatures are so scared of being primaried, they run and hide rather than act in the best interest of the country. To maintain absolute control and play to their bases, Congress creates these omnibus bills that nobody reads and doesn't even understand what's in them. Why isn't immigration a sufficiently important subject to merit its own legislation? Couldn't Congress focus on specific immigration issues in which the majority could agree instead of playing politics and passing the buck? Now, why do our representatives instantly bow to pressure from their party leader? All we have to do is look at the election system. States have closed primaries. There's a right-wing Republican running against a left-wing Democrat. Moderates and independents are shut out. Anybody with the guts to stand against their party is finished. Gerrymandering. Fewer than 10% of all elections are competitive. Parties nominate candidates loyal to their bases, and the candidate from the dominant party always wins. So with uncompetitive elections, the parties control the legislators. Now, to pass legislation, we have to change how people are elected so they are more willing to act in the interests of the country rather than in the interests of their party. This means ending gerrymandering, opening elections so independents can vote, and adopting new election systems like top two nonpartisan primaries, ranked choice voting, and others to reduce the power of the two parties and produce bipartisanship. Now, I'm just going to digress for 1 second. If you don't believe that these new election systems like top two nonpartisan primaries or ranked choice voting work, let's just take 1 second and look at the face of those who stood against their parties on the impeachment of Donald Trump. In Trump's impeachment, every candidate from a traditional election system who had to face voters, meaning everybody but Romney, who hasn't run for re-election yet, lost, quit, or changed parties. While 7 of the 8, and these are Democrats who voted against Trump's impeachment or Republicans who voted for it, while 7 of the 8 from states with ranked choice voting or top two nonpartisan primaries won. What that means is in the traditional voting systems, the parties can control everything. And in states with different voting systems, people can stand up for things in which they believe. Now, if you're on this presentation, you probably know our organization is called Reform Elections Now, with our subtitle, Breaking the Partisan Gridlock. We selected these names because we thought government had become too polarized, and the best way to solve the underlying problem was to change the way elections are run. If our elected representatives can't deal with immigration, what can they do? We have a government in which both parties want problems to get worse, to gain a political advantage. Moderates are almost non-existent, and election officials will not work together to solve our problem. If we want to fix immigration, we need to break the partisan gridlock. For 34 years, Congress has been unable or unwilling to pass any legislation because immigration is just a symptom of a more perverse problem. Our government is broken because of the partisan gridlock. It doesn't matter who proposes a law. If the minute the law is introduced, the former president and Congress say it's DOA. If we want to fix immigration or any other subject of concern to the American people, we have to change the way government works. So, as we said, the first step is to change how elections are run. Promote moderation and bipartisan. We need open primaries, any gerrymandering, and new voting systems. If we change the way elections are run, we will elect more people who are willing to work together. Now, to get things done, Congress should throw away these damn omnibus bills and focus on simple issues that are not going to be campaign flyers for the next election. If we did nothing but have asylum seekers adjudicated upon arrival, have the federal government pay for immigration, and enact laws to attract the best and brightest, we would be far ahead of where we are now. We can't wait another 34 years to pass a law on immigration. We can't use our border crisis as a political tool. We can't survive with a Congress that's so polarized that it will not even address simple issues on which almost everyone will agree. Why should we leave people in limbo for 10 years waiting a court hearing? Why should the federal government set the rules and then have the state pay? Why should we admit Joel Embiid and Giannis Antetokounmpo, but turn away potential Nobel Prize winners and people with STEM doctorates from Harvard and MIT? It should be simple to solve the immigration problem. However, we believe immigration is just a symptom of our political gridlock, and solving the gridlock problem is far more complicated. Thank you very much.
We thank you, Peter. We did receive one question in the chat from, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Lex Rifle or Rifo. Would you like to ask your question, Lex?
just down the.
My short answer is no. I'd rather have you read it. I wasn't prepared
okay.
to make a personal appearance.
Okay. So the question is, I vigorously object to the statement that the USA needs more people. Why? So we can build a population of 1 billion citizens to compete better with China's 1.4 billion. So we can lead the world in contributing to global warming through our high level of consumption. Wouldn't it be better to lead the world to a smaller population that is ecologically sustainable, which can incidentally be done with quite a bit of immigration?
Yeah, I actually agree with with your question. And if I had to say more people, we're talking about when I say more people, at the moment, very small numbers, mostly to handle, as I showed on the slide, the increasing aging population. I do not think that the US needs billions of people. I said we have to set limits. But it is clear that with a lower birth rate, we will have some needs to handle, nursing, home health care and stuff like that. That was but otherwise, I think your point is well taken.
That is the one question received from the chat. If you'd like to ask a question, you can either submit it on the chat or
Raise
down on
your
your
hand.
yeah, down on your screen. Raise your hand.
Raise your
So,
hand and we're happy to talk.
which can be reached by clicking more. Paul Sarno, you can unmute yourself.
Peter, could you please talk about whether the bill that was proposed, which had too many, I agree with you, had too many subjects in it, but when Langford and his colleagues proposed the bill, the substantive argument I'm hearing from people who don't talk about what Mr. Trump said is that it really didn't solve any major problems, and therefore it wasn't worth passing. I don't know whether you're prepared to talk about the merits of it more, but how do you deal with that argument, which a number of people made to me just this morning, as a matter of fact?
And I think the answer is, as I said in the presentation, why is Congress, unable to take one problem at a time? I mean, I think that the bill solved a lot of problems. It may have created other problems, but nobody even knows what was in the bill.
Mhm.
I doubt most people have even read the bill. But this is the question that, like when the Democrats proposed the HR1 bill, which was the voting rights bill, there were 50 pages in it that were directed toward Donald Trump with rules like anybody running for president has to file 10 years of taxes. What does that have to do with voting rights? I mean, it had nothing. And as I say, this bill, it had one, it had immigration, it had everything. And, why couldn't Congress, should we have more border guards, more border patrol agents? That would be a simple bill. Why can't Congress vote to authorize more border control agents? Why can't Congress vote to authorize more people for asylum courts? I mean, a 10-year backlog is terrible. And the reason, and because people don't understand what's in the bills, it's easy for anybody to say anything they want about them.
So we received another question from Kenneth Peskin, which reads, starts out with timetable, but I think your question is, what is the timetable to enlarge the immigration courts? For example, the training of judges and or paralegals. Can it happen within a year? What happens in the interval? Alternatives.
Yeah, Ken, I mean, it could happen immediately. You could take, but there's no money. I mean, Congress has never passed funding for this. You could take you could, like in the war, like Vietnam War, World War II, there was a draft. Why couldn't Congress pass a law drafting everybody in the recent law school class to have to spend 6 months or a year working, in these courts? And it's not just the lawyers. I mean, there's no court personnel, there's nothing. So, and what happens is somebody comes into the border, they check in, they're given a court date they go to New York, they're given a court date in Kansas in 9.5 years. I mean, tell me why.
Why would anyone show up?
We can't, tell me why this isn't something that both sides should want to support.
That your thoughts are very nice and your presentation is outstanding. But I think the practicalities of what you're saying in terms of the courts, in terms of training people, are not very realistic. Never mind politically, just to happen. If you look at the history of the US gearing up, World War II, Korea, it doesn't happen so quickly as you seem to. And the idea that you're going to be able to require law school graduates to serve as judges is a great idea, but I put maybe 10% chance on it happening. So I think there's a need for some other kinds of alternatives to at least stop the flow of people coming in.
I won't argue with that. And I'm not arguing that we shouldn't stop the flood of people. What I'm saying is why 4 years ago, or 5 or 6 years ago, as this backlog started to increase, didn't Congress allocate the money to start to build more asylum courts?
I'm not a debater, but that's should have, could have, would have. The real question is what practically can get done now? And some of your points are excellent, outstanding, but how do we as citizens get it? I remember sitting in a room with about a dozen people listening to a executive vice president of a major union and a leader of the Chamber of Commerce. And they agreed on an immigration plan. This was done during George W. Bush's administration, who was a supporter of reform. And it didn't happen. Nothing happened.
So, Kenneth, that's similar, and Harvey and Paul, if you're just patient, but that's similar to a question from Cornelius Marks in the chat, who states, I agree almost 100% with what you say in the presentation. You have delineated the problem. Now, what can we as individuals do to change the way Congress is elected? I feel helpless, and I direct that because in one of the last slides, Peter talked about our core mission, which is breaking the gridlock, and some solutions that could help break the gridlock. So I'll turn it over to Peter.
Yeah, I mean, there are two things I think that we can do. The first thing we can do is to tell our elected representatives to do something. I mean, they're doing nothing right now. I mean, absolutely nothing. And, back to the last comment that was made, why don't we now at least try to increase spending for these courts? I mean, that's not very hard to do, to try to get more asylum courts. The second thing,
go ahead.
second thing is, as Eileen mentioned, that our major focus here at Reform Elections Now is to change the way elections are run. And, we talked about opening elections, to opening primaries, to eliminating closed primaries, having new voting systems like ranked choice voting or top two nonpartisan voting, and other steps. And in many states, we had a presentation last week or 2 weeks ago, where a woman from Arizona who is leading a campaign in Arizona to end the way they conduct elections. And interestingly, in Arizona, 2 senators who were moderates, Jeff Flake as a Republican and Kirsten Sinema originally as a Democrat, both are not running for re-election because they couldn't win in their primaries. We think that it's critical to change the election system so we don't have just the extremes.
And in the past, we've actually, in addition to speaking about Arizona 2 weeks ago, we've had specific presentations about state by state electoral reform, because as you may know, the states run the manner in which elections are run, not the federal government. Just to build, Peter, Eleanor Latimer, echoing Cornelius's comment, what can I do as an individual to push for these changes you've suggested? Do you know of groups, organizations that are striving to implement these changes?
Incidentally, we call him corny, Mr. Marks.
Oh.
And, I see you're
Okay.
having a problem with the whole long name there, but.
And then we'll get to Harvey and Paul. Okay.
And I think, again, there's 2 simple answers. One is to reach out to our elected representatives and say, okay, here are some simple steps on immigration that we should take. And to me, of the 3, the ones that 3 that are I only highlighted 3. I'm sure that everybody else can think of 5 or 6 others. But to me, building the asylum courts now, otherwise, at the rate we're going, it'll be a 20-year. I mean, some of the immigrants will have grandkids by the time they get to the asylum court.
Yeah.
The
Now,
second, so tell our elected representatives, do specific things. And the second thing is work with us to help create these election reforms.
yeah, we're planning to send a recording out, but there's other, in addition to ourselves, people who share our mission, like open primaries. So we'll include that. Now, Harvey, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Hey, Peter.
Hey, Harvey.
Oh, Peter and I go way back.
Yes.
Almost to grade school, but not quite.
Yeah. It's great to see you in Hawaii.
No, I'm back
in the
Fort
main.
Townsend. Yeah. Anyway, here's my comment here, which is I mean, we can go to all the causes that have led to the immigration situation today, and the easiest solution would be just what you said, which is those reforms happen in Congress, and we can quickly solve it. It's not likely to happen very quickly, and that what seems you've been pretty much concerned with are the structural ways that elections are run, which is so critical and needed, right? What I've been more focused on, going back to the conversations we had 6 months ago, whatever it was, is the messaging, how political messaging is done, particularly in campaigns, right? So for instance, right now, in this election, we got 435 people in the House who are up for election and roughly 35 senators. So there's 465 roughly people running. A certain percentage of those would be open to talking about the kind of narrative that you just presented. The general narrative out there is immigration is a mess and is insolvable.
Right.
Right? There isn't a counter narrative, which you basically described, which is all the benefits of it, how we could set this system up. If we could start to get some people who are running for office, whether incumbent or challengers, like I was just talking last night to a woman, I may have the first congressional candidate that I'll be working with, right, who's running in one of the congressional districts in Washington. And we had a really good conversation about creating these parallel narratives so you can show people how in 5-10 years, things are going to get that much worse or how things could be that much better. And it's really a parallel strategy around climate change. I'm trying to do a climate change, which is a similar situation, goes back even longer, 50 years of mostly inaction. So if we can begin to get people who are running to talk about the positive narrative and the benefits that it brings and show the contrast, I think we got a shot at raising a lot of awareness this year.
I agree with everything you said. And incidentally, Harvey is one of the best political communicators in the world. For anybody on this call who is running for elective office, and I know of at least one, I will send you Harvey's name.
And you're not announcing your candidacy?
No, it's not me, but there is somebody on this call who is running for a significant elective office.
Paul, thank you for your question, Harvey. Now, Paul Sarno, and then we have 2 questions in the chat.
Peter, is it true that the undocumented immigrants count in the number of representatives that are assigned to a state every 10 years?
That
count in the census for that purpose?
is very unclear. When I say it's very unclear, what I mean is there are clearly undocumented immigrants counted in the census. Okay. And there are clearly plenty of undocumented immigrants missed in the census, because if some census worker comes to my house to take my census, and I know there are 7 of us living here, all undocumented, I'm going to say, no hablo inglés, no vivo aquí, lo siento mucho, whatever that means.
But Peter, if they do answer the census, whether the paper sent to them or the person who comes to the door, maybe because they believe they're going to qualify eventually, do they count in the allocation of representatives?
Their questions, it depends on how they answer questions of their citizenship questions on the census. Depends how they answer them. Data would indicate a very small percentage of the undocumented immigrants actually participate in the census for a whole.
I asked the question because I heard a person make an argument on C-SPAN that the reason, for instance, that California is not interested in changing the present situation is that many undocumented immigrants come to California and they qualify for additional representatives for California.
They're losing representatives.
Yeah, California just lost 3 representatives. So
it's hard.
I'll tell you what, go to Texas and go to Texas with a bus and take a lot of those people to California. So maybe in 2030,
Yeah.
they'll get some of those representatives back.
Yeah.
Then Richard and G, if it's G, I just want to ask two questions in the chat that came in before your raising hand. Jim Fisher states that asylum adjudication is very complicated. Is the person seeking asylum a security risk? Is the danger real? Are they really at risk in their home country beyond what is normal
Yeah.
in some countries, and on and on? To adjudicate, someone has to check their story and do a full security assessment. Do you think there would be agreement on more draconian, simple solutions? Call it just say no and back you go.
Well, first of all, Jim Fisher isn't even an American. He's from Canada. So why we even put up with his questions, I don't know. However, since he's one of the smartest people I do know, and a dean, the point is very simple. Asylum adjudication is very simple, and it ain't gonna get easier after these people have been staying here for 10 years. I mean, it's like the questions about the risk in their home country and beyond. I mean, hello, I've been living in New York for 10 years. I don't remember what things were like in my home country. But you're right, Jim, it is complicated. And maybe that's why everybody has ducked it. But the point is it better to duck it and just leave people in limbo than to deal with it and figure out the right way to deal with it?
And welcome, Mary Flannery. Mary's question was, when the House refused to vote on the proposed immigration bill, did any of you reach out to the Speaker of the House and or representatives, and what was their response?
I did not reach out personally to the Speaker. It's all I did was listen to, all the communication in the media. And, I think what was amazing to me was it had a majority of Republicans backing it when it came out and a majority of Democrats. And then, within 2 days, the whole thing just disappeared.
Yeah, and that's where having more moderates that aren't at the risk of being primary would at least give you more leverage on influence. So Richard, would you like to ask your question?
It's actually on that point. I wanted to go back and I'm following on Harvey's comment about the need for better communication and going back to Paul's question about the immigration omnibus bill, which I think you avoided answering, Peter.
Okay.
Our answer was we shouldn't do great big omnibus bills. We should do them one at a time. I absolutely agree with that. But here was a bill that, like it or not, would have been better passed than not passed. Things would have moved in the right direction. And I will confess to not reading the 1,000 pages, but I read a bunch of summaries of the bill. My impression is that on balance, it would have been good. And as you just said, we had bipartisan support for the bill until Trump figured out that Biden would get credit for solving the immigration problem, which would be disastrous for him. And therefore, he got the word out to the Republicans, don't do this. And it was gone. I haven't heard, as you said, it's been in the media, but I haven't heard enough communication from the administration about how stupid this process was, why they've been able to pull together something that would have been good for the country. But this one guy has the power and influence to be able to get people off the bill. That's a communication issue and a very, very serious one.
You're correct. But I will tell you that looking at the other side of this, when things like HR1 came up or the infrastructure bill, Build Back Better, you know, if people don't understand what's in the legislation, then you really can't communicate about it. Oh, it's nice, we're fixing the border problem. And, you know, I think the communication problem comes because they're not simple subjects that people can understand. And incidentally, the bill lost some supporters because of Ukraine. It lost, it involved the Middle East. I mean, you know, what, I guess the question I have is, why couldn't immigration merit its own bill that at least we could discuss? Wouldn't that have been an easier bill to discuss?
Peter, no question. I'm not arguing that. I'm simply arguing that there was a bill on the table that had enough support to get passed.
And what has happened, if you look back in the last 34 years, is time and time again. I mean, if you go back to these bills in 2005 and 2006 and 2000, you know, where the bill came up and it had 40,000, a wall, a fence, a wall, and 40,000 more border agents. And the House passes one bill, the Senate passes another bill, and they can't agree on a solution in committee.
So there's a, thank you. There's another question, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, G.
Hi, yes, Eileen. Thank you. And Peter, thank you. It's always you. Thanks for always putting up all these very provocative, very great discussion. I really appreciate that. So I'm an immigrant and turned sort of naturalized U.S. citizen. So I'm certainly for immigration. Now I want to sort of ask each of us to think about another model that's adopted by our northern, neighbor, Canada. Canada seems to have a very sensible immigration policy. So their immigration is very transparent. They have a ranking grading system based on, your whatever educations you've gotten, whether it's in an industry that they are in great need for people like nurses and whatnot. And as a result, to sort of, put you in the queue to get your immigration visa. At the same time, they seem to be, obviously there's not much problem on their border in terms of way less problem in terms of illegal border crossing on their side. So my question would be, shouldn't we look to our northern neighbor to adopt a similar, system like that? Meaning to streamline and allow a faster adjudication of immigration applications from the people who have gotten here legally, at the same time stop the illegal border crossing, because it could in the long run really affect our welfare system potentially. And another thing that Canada does really well is that they do allow non-immigrant work visa to be obtained pretty easily. For instance, they have nanny visas that you can get very quickly. Think about how hard it is for us to get, childcare, to get senior care here in the US. I just wish that we could loosen up that kind of visa to allow hardworking folks from other parts of the world to come in to make a good living, send money back to home, and to make an honest living. And they don't have to cross the border to endure all that hardship and potential danger of death. Like, I'm just curious what everybody thinks.
Shani, the point that Jay brings up is a really important one. I mean, and this was number 3 on my list, the best and the brightest. But and if Jim Fisher is still around, what Jay said about Canada is exactly right. Canada has a policy of rating, choosing who it wants and making it easier. I mean, she gave the example of nannies, but if you are if you are a cybersecurity expert or AI expert, you can get into Canada much easier than you can get into the United States. They have a system for picking and choosing who they want. So I think it's worth looking. I think it's be a very interesting idea to look at what Canada does and see if there are things that Canada is doing that we should be doing.
So we have a question for Bill Rosser, or no
Yes.
longer? Okay.
No, here, yes. The power to make these changes rests with Congress. And the congressmen that are populating those bodies are not doing the work. And there's various reasons for that. But they like their job and they have to pass certain tests to be able to run. So choosing to run for Congress is influenced strongly by the political parties themselves. You have to go through a whole series of qualifications, and your chances, if you're not sponsored by a party, are kind of minimal. So I just want to support the idea in reforming elections now that we really focus on the open primaries where the candidates got to run before the primary election are not chosen by the political party. You don't have to have a certain extreme stance. And if you do things like ranked choice voting as well, the candidates running have to appeal not just to one party, but to the broadest base of potential voters that exist. The result of using that means a more moderate, less extreme position in Congress that is more likely to take a reasonable position about passing some legislation and not just listen to the party boss who are controlling the primary business and so forth. So I think it's another thing that could help in the same manner is to have term limits for congressmen. I'm not going to say what they might be, but not a lifelong career that's very comfortable for them, but a finite period of time that I think would also encourage the participation in the government. Running for Congress, people have a greater support for the goodness of the country and not for their own backside.
Well stated. But before you ask the next question, Eileen, can I ask you, Jim Fisher, can I ask you to make a comment about Canada?
Oh my gosh. You want me to make a comment about Canada?
About the system that you have in Canada and how it differs
Okay.
from
Well, two things. First of all, I think you're actually on the right track when you get at reform elections now, because my general point, and Peter and I talk about this often, is on many, many, many issues. If you look at the polls, Canadians feel the same as Americans about all kinds of things, about immigration, gun control, environment, lots and lots of stuff. But we're actually able to do something, and your system keeps you from doing it. I mean, immigration is classic. It is a complex, but actually fairly simple problem. It's a problem endlessly. But what you can do is you can say, as we can do, because we have a system where you can pass rules and make them happen. We set a limit. How many people do we want every year? Done. Then you can divide it by what kind of skills you want. Done. And in fact, we need more carpenters and plumbers, frankly, as much as anything. done. We can say, which is something I did actually when I was the dean at the school, we can go to Ottawa and say, look, we have these really, really bright people who are getting masters. Why don't we keep them instead of letting them go home? So we set a system says you can stay for 3 years if you have a master's, and in that time you can apply for citizenship. And if you have qualified, you can stay. And if you can't, you got to go home. So there's a lot of those things you can do if you have a government system that enables basically the will of the majority to come to get through. It is asylum and refugees is just a freak of an issue. Everyone feels badly about the people who come to do asylum, but how do you know, and how many refugees do you take? I mean, we do set quotas. We can say a certain amount. We'll take 30,000 Syrian refugees when that was around, and that was it. So you could set a number. But those things are really hard because they get at your conscience about who you allow in and who you don't. And it takes forever. So we are in the same position with asylum seekers. It takes years to adjudicate an asylum, even if you have the people. So you can't fix it with more judges. You have to fix it with saying that there's a simple rule. I mean, here's a rule you could do in America. You decided you would let Venezuelans in because their economic prospects are terrible and you don't like the government of Venezuela. Well, I'm sorry, your economic prospects aren't good. We're not going to solve Venezuela's economic problems. So anyway, so I think the immigration thing is complex, but fixable if you have a government that actually enables you to express the will of the majority. But you've got such a freak of a problem.
But I mean, Canada, I mean, Hamid pointed out that we don't have, that Canada doesn't have as long a border with,
yes,
South and Central America. But there are some simple things that Canada does that make sense that nobody argues about. And I just wanted to point that out to everybody, that it does not take rocket science to say, okay, we need plumbers and carpenters, let's get them. Or Jim was the dean of the leading business school in Canada, at the University of Toronto, went school at the University of Toronto. And, to say, okay, we have MBAs who are graduating here, we want to keep them, let's give them a chance to contribute to the economy. How complicated should that be?
Yeah, it wasn't very, that kind of thing isn't complicated. But look, I just want to say, I mean, everything is not idyllic here. Because we do absolutely, we recognize that we have this favorable situation where we are surrounded by 3 oceans and America keeps us from having our borders overrun. So our overrun issue is people who come on temporary work visas, who come on visitor visas, who sneak in through all kinds of different ways. And I think we have, like, right now, 1.5 million or so of those kinds of people. And they're here and they're staying. And so it'll be an issue that we have to deal with it. So
just so you understand, Canada is facing a gigantic immigration crisis in early 2025. If Donald Trump wins re-election, there are going to be so many American liberals trying to cross the border. Canada will have a huge Chardonnay shortage.
Well, here we are. I'll just say that from a point of view of being the dean of the business school, Donald Trump was such we call it the Trump dividend. When he got in, the number of extraordinarily qualified international students who applied to our school, it became a problem of processing the applications. They were fabulous students, and we got them for a number of years. So we all said, thank you, Donald. And they come and they pay the international fee, so they pay $100 grand. Thank you, Donald. Thank you.
So, no, thank you, Jim. Harvey, there's just one in the queue that came in before you raised your hand. Lois and Arnold state, will you please elaborate on the rivalry between states concerning immigration? How will federal funding of immigration processes end it? And why would it be beneficial to end state rivalry?
Yeah, I think it's very simple. When you look, for example, at Texas and Governor Abbott putting the immigrants on buses and planes and sending them to other states, part of that is political grandstanding, but a very substantial part of that is economic. These immigrants come over and they're flooding El Paso and the other cities along the border. And, they come to New York and New York tries to send them to Vermont or, Connecticut or some other place. And one of the reasons, as I quoted, is, where Mayor Adams of New York is saying to himself, or saying not to himself, saying to everybody, we're going to have to cut our education, police, and health budgets for next year, for the next 3-4 years, because we can't afford to pay for the immigrants. And all I'm saying is the immigrants come to some places more than others. They come to California, they come to Arizona, they come to New Mexico, they come to Texas, they get sent to New York, to New Jersey, to Colorado, to Denver, to Chicago. And why is that an expense of New York City as opposed to an expense of the United States? That it is fair for, if the federal government is making a decision to admit people, and those people will represent a cost, why should that cost be borne by specific states and cities as opposed to the country as a whole?
So Harvey did have a question. He just left the screen. Here he's back.
Sorry. Yeah, I actually two points I want to make here. One is, when I go back to the idea of a narrative is a story that it has elements of past, present, and future. And we humans are hardwired to make sense of life through stories and to tell stories and to be attracted to stories. And the examples we were talking about of Canada as a country, and there are probably others like New Zealand, although I don't know that for sure, that have basically handled the immigration problem, become role models that show it is possible to come up with a more or less sane system for handling immigration that can become part of the narrative story. And the other piece that would be part of the narrative story are all these cities, counties, and states that have already included the electoral reforms that you're really focusing on, the ranked choice, et cetera. They make the story credible. I mean, a narrative has to be a coherent story that's credible because it's backed up by evidence that we're making progress on it, and it's compelling because it makes a difference in the lives of people today and in the future. So that's one point. The other point is one that doesn't get talked about very much, and I'd be interested in people's perceptions of it, which is that this is an election about a particular candidate, a Democrat versus a Republican, whether at the presidential level or whether at the congressional level. It's about two candidates running against each other in November. It's also about two parties, about the Democrats or the Republicans of who's going to control the country. But in addition, this is the part that isn't talked about. It's an election between two worldviews. Yeah. One worldview that says, We want to be, we have already become and will become more so and are moving towards becoming a multicultural country that is committed to the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Versus another worldview that says we will be a multicultural country that is dominated by one particular race, one particular religion, and one particular gender. And we will set up a government that is committed to the greatest good for the fewest number of people. That is really what this election in many ways is about and doesn't get much play. And so I'm trying, again, I'm doing homework trying to find ways to get candidates to talk about some of these issues because it's the 3,000-pound conundrum in the room.
Yeah, and that's so much more specific than what I, define as Biden seemed to first start talking about threats to democracy, but that's so conceptual. It's hard for people to understand. And then he seemed, to my way of observing, to backtrack and just runs fear again. Fear, as opposed to an aspirational vision. So, which you articulated.
Yeah, I wish you were part of our group, Harvey.
You just got to, double my pay.
Well said.
Let me see. Oh, here. Is it Hamid? Noted where elected representatives hold town hall meetings, voters can attend such meetings and ask questions like these there. Correct. A lot of, I'm a member of the League of Women Voters in Florida, and a lot of politics is local, and you could build bridges across different parties that way. So,
but the problem is that you're correct, Hamid, but if only 10% of the elections are competitive, and if voters don't turn out, my favorite example is that when AOC first ran for Congress against Crowley, who was the number 3 Democrat, the total in a district of 710,000 people, because of the closed primaries and the different primary days, the total turnout in the primary was 29,000 people. There were AOC got 15,000 votes. Crowley got 11,000 votes. And the point of the matter is that when 15,000 votes, it's a Democratic district, so that's it. So when 15,000 votes can change the political culture of the United States, there's something wrong with the system.
Okay. All right. See you in 10. Bye-bye.
Jim Fisher noted our open access interesting session. Thanks for letting a foreigner in. And I think there's one more. Yeah, Linda Sweeney, we agree. Almost half of US voters are independent, correct, and growing. If states exclude them from voting in primaries, it's not fair to them. Also, they are more likely to be in the middle, yes, and candidates would have to relate to moderate views. Ranked choice voting also is a system because the votes eventually get allocated. It breeds that it's not negative campaigning, and I think experience would show it tends to result in moderates winning out.
And let me make a comment to Linda. In the state of Oregon, for example, 44% of all voters are registered independents. The Democrats have like 29%, Republicans like 23%. And yet Oregon has closed primaries. And so what that means is, and you saw a perfect example in the last election, there was a moderate Democrat lost in the primary to a left-wing Democrat. Then the Republicans won the seat in the general election. But, if you don't figure out a way to give the majority of people a chance to vote, you end up with just people on the extremes who won't work together to solve these problems.
And thank you, Linda. John German has a question now.
Peter, I emailed Mike Otten before this presentation when it was announced, asking whether Steve McIntosh's book, Why Centrism Fails, would be a topic of discussion, because it is absolutely on that subject of culture that Harvey just brought up. So that's my question. Thank you.
We will look at it. We will look at it and consider it for a topic.
We done?
It's up to Eileen. Eileen, are we done?
Yeah, that's all the questions in the queue. So I'll turn it over.
Eileen's the boss here, so it's real simple.
Oh, wait, G, one more question, G.
Sorry, just one last thing. I don't think we discussed too much in terms of differentiating the legal immigrant applicants versus illegal crossing here, because I think that while we want to be embracing and welcoming, we do need a process. Like what was it just now, a gentleman from Canada, what's his name?
Jim.
Yeah, Jim mentioned. So we need to have some predefined number. This is the number of people we want to admit, and this part is for asylum seekers, and this part is for other type of professional visa through that route, and so on and so forth. Right now, the situation going on in our southern border, it's just completely out of control. So I don't think it's necessarily that people are against immigration, is that people are worried about the overrun in the southern border. So I hope that we are all pro-immigration, but we need to have a process, a right process going, so that like what Peter's talking about, to attract the contributors to our economy, to our society, and the people who have, upright, standing, and so on. So I think that's kind of like lurking in the back of people's minds. So I think that I don't necessarily think that the majority of folks are against, definitely not the majority. I don't think the people who crying out are against immigration. They're concerned about the illegal crossing on the southern border.
No, I think that's an example of poor messaging, because it gets wrapped into one ball. So I'll just say, we'll send out a recording of this presentation to all, both you who attended as well as registered. Please feel free to share it, and that will include an ability to opt into our communications as well as our website. I'll turn it back to Peter just for thank yous, or Mike for closing remarks.
Thank you.
No, this was very engaging, great questions, and thank you very much for your interest.